I want to thank everybody for being here today. And we should probably go ahead and get started. And let me start by saying a very warm welcome back to people whom I've had the great opportunity to be in a learning community with before. And welcome to anybody who I'm getting the opportunity to meet for the first time today. Thank you for making the time to be here for this two-part learning community conversation, 3 hours today and 3 hours during our next session that will focus specifically on group as a method and group facilitation. Just by way of a brief introduction about myself, and sorry to repeat this for those of you who I've had the opportunity to meet before. My name is Paul Warren. I am a research project director at the New York State Psychiatric Institute in Manhattan. My offices are in Manhattan, and if you happen to be crossing the George Washington Bridge from New Jersey to Manhattan, and you see that building along the side of the island of Manhattan that has green glass on it, that's my office building. So I don't have an office with a window, but that's my office building. I'm not complaining though. I'm also a senior staff trainer and curriculum writer for the Northeast and Caribbean Addiction Technology Transfer Center. And I'm very fortunate also to be a graduate of Hunter College School of Social Work, where thank you, Kim, at that particular time, when I was studying social work, Hunter offered tracks or methods of practice. Generally speaking, I think social work education today is more of a generalist practice, but back then we got to study particular tracks. And I was very fortunate to study group facilitation with Dr. George Getzel, Dr. Robert Salmon, and Dr. Roselle Kurland, who have written a number of really extraordinary papers and articles and books on group facilitation. So I'm really thrilled to be able to engage in this particular learning community conversation about group facilitation. As I said, I'm a social worker by training, and I began my social service career providing direct services to people living with HIV and AIDS in 1991. And I did that exclusively until 2003, where I then made a transition into workforce development and training and technical assistance. So very, very happy to be focusing on this particular topic with everybody today. I'm going to share my screen. We'll take care of a couple of logistical details, and then we will. Okay. So Tony works for HIV Alliance in Salem, Oregon. Excellent. Excellent. Good to know that. I'm not familiar with that organization, so maybe you'll send me a link and I can find out more. Um, We'll take care of a couple of logistical details, and then we will dive into this conversation. And let me also just say, folks, that as I said at the beginning, this is a two-part conversation. This first part is 3 hours. The second part is 3 hours. And in order to receive credit for the full 6 hours, you have to be present for the full 6 hours. So unfortunately, we can't grant partial credit, and we're not also able to offer makeup for this particular course because it is a group facilitation training, and you need to be a part of the learning community in order to fulfill the credit for the particular course. So just wanted to make that expressly clear to everybody. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now. We'll take care of a couple of additional logistics, and then we will go ahead and begin to explore this content for a little less than 3 hours now today. So again, group facilitation skills for alcohol and other substance use counselors. What I can also tell you, folks, is that anybody who is developing or currently facilitating groups, whether they're alcohol or substance use related groups, can certainly draw reflection and possibly refinement of your group practice from this particular learning community conversation. So it's not just exclusive to alcohol and substance use. Ah, thank you, Tonia, for that link. Wonderful. Excellent. Because we are a learning community of 52 people, and this conversation is really meant to support what you're doing and to be relevant to what you're doing. What we talk about as a learning community, as a group focused on this particular topic, may not necessarily reflect the official views or position of the funder of this particular learning community conversation. And that's perfectly okay because it is intended to be of value and relevance to you. Thank you, Karen. Thanks for typing your name in the chat. As we engage as a learning community together, I would ask that we're all intentional and considerate about the language that we use. Words do have power, and we want to be putting people first intentionally and making sure that we are using language that is inclusive, respectful, and welcoming to all 53 of us that are in our learning community today. Welcome. PowerPoint has now made it official. Welcome back to those of you whom I've had the opportunity to be in a learning community conversation with before. There will be a brief evaluation at the conclusion of the second session. So we will ask you to please complete that. I will do my best in the second session to leave a little bit of time at the end so you can complete the evaluation. This is a fairly robust agenda. I think I say that for every learning community conversation that I facilitate. This one is particularly robust. There's a lot that we can focus on and explore together. I'm hopeful that we'll get to cover all of it. And what I can assure you of is when you complete that evaluation, you will receive a copy of these slides that you are free to share and use in any way that supports your work. There are 54 of us in the learning community currently, and if you have not yet done so, this will be the last time that I make this request. I hope. If you have not yet done so, please go ahead and make sure that we have your full name typed in the chat because that will serve as our timestamp that you are actually present and you do deserve the credit for your participation. Excellent. So again, please make sure to type your full name in the chat. And if you've done it already, thank you. That's fantastic. You may or may not recall when you registered for this learning community conversation that you actually agreed to have a working camera and to be on camera and have a working microphone and use your microphone during the full duration of the training. Now, having said that, if you're having camera problems or technical difficulties, as we were this morning, understood, just let me know in a private message in the chat. Also, if you need to step away, and stepping away means for a few moments, it doesn't mean 25, 35, 40 minutes. But if you need to step away, don't worry about that. Please do attend to whatever you need to attend to. But please do send me a private message and just say, I'm stepping away, turn off your camera. And then when you come back, just turn your camera back on and rejoin us. I would ask, because there are 54 of us, that you remain muted if you can. If at any time, though, when I'm speaking, or if there's a pause and there's anything you want to add, question, reflect on, share a reaction to, you should not hesitate to unmute and make your comment, share your point of view, whatever you may need to do. You're more than welcome to do that. I would ask, though, that if our other Paul that's in the learning community today has the floor and is making a point, please don't interrupt. Please don't interrupt each other. You're more than welcome to interrupt me at any time, but please don't interrupt each other. I would also just remind folks that we are uh, in a learning community together. We all have very unique experiences, perspectives, information. And the point is not necessarily for us to all agree. It's really that we all are looking at this content together. So I would ask, especially if you hear something that you don't particularly agree with or you have a different perspective, you're more than welcome to voice that. I would just ask that we all work toward being open to what's being focused on, what's being discussed at any given moment. Another guideline that I'm going to ask folks to consider and to do our best to adhere to is to speak from the I. I have this particular belief. I know this to be true. I have this particular information. Um, and Kim was also asking if the learning community conversation is going to be recorded. Yes, it is. And the recording will be available to anybody from our learning community who wants to see it. So just keeping that in mind. Yeah, and my colleague Clyde Frederick just put in the chat that if anybody is sharing their computer with somebody else, please make sure that you add that person's name also in the chat because we want to make sure that everybody is getting an opportunity to receive credit for their participation. So that last guideline, I'll just repeat it, was that I was asking that we all focus on making I statements. So just keeping that in mind. I believe this. I know this to be true. And I will also say that in regard to this, the attending two parts to get full credit, we will be offering this course fairly regularly. So don't worry if for whatever reason you can't do the full thing this time. It will be offered maybe, 3 or 4 times a year. So don't worry, you won't miss it if you actually want this particular course. I will ask at this particular moment, before I ask for your agreement to the group guidelines, I will ask, are there any other guidelines that anybody in our learning community today, of the 53 of us, are there any other guidelines that people would like to add or suggest for us to consider? Sheila says no. So, does anybody else? We know Sheila doesn't have any other additional what she wants to add. Does any no crosstalk? Jeffrey says, okay. Thank you, Jeffrey. Yep, excellent, fantastic. Any other guidelines that people would like to put on the table? You can unmute, you can put them in the chat. All right. Okay. Jeffrey, you have somebody who gives you a thumbs up on your no crosstalk. Excellent. All right. So, folks, two. Okay. Okay. Yeah, now two. I'm watching that. Absolutely. Kim, do you have a guideline you'd like to add? Or are you just waving hello? Kim Williamson. No. No? Okay. All right. All right. So, folks, can everybody agree to the guidelines as stated? You can wave, nod, throw money, deposit in my checking account. Fantastic. Okay. I'm going to take it at a later time. Understood. That's fine, Paula. Thank you for letting me know. Wonderful. Jeffrey says, send me your routing number. Absolutely. Fantastic, Jeffrey. I like you already. Uh, excellent. Wonderful. Now, folks, I'm going to share my screen again. Those are our guidelines. We can refer to them at any point and just keep that in mind. So let's be very clear about the purpose of this particular learning community conversation today. One of them certainly is to focus on the process of the development of groups, and specifically the use of group as a method of intervention, meaning we have a variety of interventions available to us that we can use as we interact with individuals, with groups, and whatever. And group work is a very specific type of intervention that we can actually uh, focus on and employ as a way to positively support and impact folks. Also, another particularly important consideration to keep in mind, because sometimes there's confusion about this, is the distinction actually between group work as a method and the process of casework being conducted in a group. Those are two very different things, and one of them is group work and one of them is not, even though both of them involve a group of people and someone in the role of facilitator. And we're going to talk more about that as we go forward. And actually, I think in between part one and part two, I have an article that was written by Dr. Roselle Kurland, one of my mentors. And I think that in between, I will share that article. And your mission, if you choose to accept it, it's a brief article. Your mission, if you choose to accept it, will be to review that article. And we will begin, and you can skim it, whatever works best for you, or you can ignore it completely if that works best for you as well. But I would like to share it with you as a resource. And we will probably begin our learning community conversation in part two with a little bit of a discussion, a focus on that particular article. And having said that, I will give myself the same opportunity to reread the article because it was a number of years ago that I read it. Also, we're going to take some time, hopefully, to focus on some of the specific skills that are employed and that are necessary to actually facilitate a group. No, Paul, your mission will not blow up like in the Mission Impossible video. No, the article is not combustible. It may be inflammatory, but it's not combustible. Excellent question. You know, I'm going to throw out a question. We're going to review learning objectives in a minute, but I want to throw out a question for everybody in the learning community to consider at this particular point, because we'll have a quick, large group discussion about it. But I want to throw it out now before I go over the objectives so you can be pondering it, because I have a hunch about this and I want to check out my hunch. So the question that I'm asking you to ponder is if you are currently or have in the past led groups, but if you are currently leading them or if you have in the past led them, what was your group training like? So, how did you learn how to facilitate groups? So, I want you to be gently pondering that while I quickly review the learning objectives. And then I'm going to take the screen down and we'll have a little bit of a discussion about that. So we are going to review and discuss the stages of group development. We're going to talk, of course, about the difference between casework and group work. Again, we're going to focus specifically on group purpose in the establishment and the maintaining of group guidelines. And we will also define and discuss the role of the group purpose statement. And we'll also talk about the meaning of this particular statement as it relates to group work. The greatest artists know when not to play their instrument. Tune in for part two to find out or you probably have your own thoughts about what that means at this particular point. So, okay. So a couple of people are putting some things in the chat about how they learned. And if you want to send that to other people too, you just need to make sure that you're sort of connecting that to everybody. Um, Yeah, and Jeffrey, you're noting that you haven't done them yet. Okay, so I want to just take down the screen for a minute, and I just want to ask folks, so anybody who wrote anything in the chat, especially anybody who wrote in, I was thrown in, would any of those people like to, if they're able to, would they like to unmute and tell us a little bit about their thrown in experience? And yeah, go ahead, Eugene. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a
Oh, go ahead. You just muted yourself again. Go ahead.
yeah, all right. I have a thrown in experience. I just started working at the Alliance for Positive Change, and the second day on the job, my supervisor handed me a manual and told us we was going into Woody Crest. And on the bus, I was reading the manual, like really nervous. And the first group went really good. Everybody received me. I just banked on my lived experience, and I just got better at it as time went on. But I
Fantastic.
also participated in a lot of mocks afterwards just to build myself up to go back in.
Okay. So, Eugene, if it's okay, can I comment on a couple of things that you said?
Yes.
First, let me clarify. When I was kind of smiling as you were saying that, I was not laughing at you, I was laughing with you. Just to be very clear.
All right.
Okay. The other thing that I want to underline that Eugene said is that he was informed that he was going to Woody Crest and given a manual to review. So I'm going to guess, Eugene, that this is a psychoeducational group that is manualized, and there are sort of like directions about how group one is supposed to go, how group
Yes.
two is supposed to go, how group three is supposed to go.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that's a manualized psychoeducational model, and that's one type of group. And Eugene, is it fair to say too, is that group time limited? Like, are there like X number of sessions that people have to complete, or is it open-ended?
Not selling X amount of sessions that they have to complete.
Excellent. So it's also a time limited group. And I'm also going to guess too, Eugene, is it a closed group, meaning that the people that start the group are the only people in the group, or is it an open group?
Apps, it's a closed group. You a
Okay.
mind reader. You a psychic?
I think Eugene broke up a little bit there. I think he said I was psychotic. No, he said I was psychic. That
Yeah.
was it. Excellent. No, I am not, but I am a group worker. And I have created and led a number of groups. But again, let's be very clear about this excellent example that Eugene has given us. A, thrown into it. B, handed the manual, read it on the bus, and be prepared to facilitate. And then it's closed, time limited psychoeducational model. Okay. Eugene, there's something else you said that I really, really want to underline, and I'm not at all surprised, even in this short interaction with you, which is, and tell me if I heard you correctly when you said this, you said the first group went really well, and I really banked a lot on and capitalized on my lived experience in order to kind of connect or engage with the group. Did I hear you correctly when you said that?
That's correct.
Okay. I want to underline that because the group facilitator, Eugene was able to use his engagement skill as a way to begin to build rapport with the group members. And that is also a critical group facilitation skill. Eugene also had the benefit of having lived experience that connected with perhaps the experience of the people in the group. And that can also help to build rapport if indeed you have that. Not everybody has that. So you can't necessarily, and I love the way you put it, Eugene, bank on that. But in some instances, you can because it helps you to have a deeper understanding of the participants in the group because
That's
maybe you've had some of their experience. Am I getting that right, Eugene?
that's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And thank you so much for starting us off. And Eugene, you prompt me to want to poll the entire learning community right now. And then we're going to open it up to anybody else who wants to talk about how they were trained. So this poll is inspired by Eugene. Folks, use the chat by typing the letter Y if it's the answer is yes, and no if the answer is no. And let's hear from all 55 of us if we can. How many people in this, and Eugene, watch the responses to this poll. Okay. How many people in this learning community learned how to do groups by being thrown into doing groups? So if you've had that experience, and I saw that a couple of people put that in the chat, type Y into the chat. And Eugene, notice what you're seeing here. I'm seeing a lot of Y's. Yeah, and somebody just put in, no, I had formal training. Excellent. So some people have had formal training, and a lot of people get thrown in. And Eugene, can I ask you just one quick follow-up question?
Yes, sir.
Given your experience, bus manual review thrown into it, what is your feeling about groups at this particular point? Do you like doing groups as a method, or would you rather not if you had a choice?
It's kind of like mixed feelings. And it depends on, I guess, the area and the group because some people in the groups could be very brutal. I've seen groups tear people apart.
Yeah,
And the reason, and there's reasonings behind it, not knowing your material,
yeah.
giving false information. Like once those things go out, you can't get those back. It's hard to contain groups. So those are my key takeaways from doing groups. If I do that, I'm really comfortable in doing it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Eugene. And again, you didn't use this word, but I want to underline this because it's kind of a secondary learning objective to our being together. Is that my hope is that our 6 hours together will leave people feeling more confident about developing and facilitating groups. That's my hope that you'll feel more confident. And I really appreciate your answer, Eugene, because it's pretty normal when you've seen stuff go down in a group to have mixed feelings about group as a method. Yeah. I'll tell you, one thing that I had the opportunity to do when I was at Hunter College School of Social Work is I got to teach advanced group work for group work majors. My mentor, Dr. George Getzel, retired, and he invited me to teach his advanced group work methods course when he retired. And I got to teach group work elective for non-major. And one of the things that I heard a lot, and Eugene, this is why I asked you the follow-up question. One of the things that I heard from a lot of people in the group work elective for non-majors, meaning non-group majors, was that they were thrown into a group, and somebody referenced in the chat, and Eugene alluded to this, that somebody mentioned in the chat being thrown to the lion. And many of the people in the group work elective class said that they were thrown in and they got eaten up and they were terrified about doing groups and were left with a really bad experience. And that really inspired me to want to teach that course to help people to feel comfortable and good about using group as a method and to help them feel prepared to address some of the things that can happen in groups. So, anybody in our learning community, some of the people who said, no, I had formal training, is there anybody in the learning community who, quote unquote, had formal group training who'd like to tell us a little bit about that? Yeah, go ahead, Oscar.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I did not have any formal training in
Okay.
the actual dynamics of running a group. There were some trainings on the topics of what we were going to discuss, and whether and we were requested to create bullet points for topics.
Yep.
Then supervisors would review those bullet points, and basically, if the context of the bullet points was okay, they would approve it.
Yep.
They would usually have more concerns with just how many bullet points and whether those issues of the bullet points were going to be addressed
Yep.
within the time limit that we had, whether it was 45 minutes or 60 minutes. So if we had too many complicated bullet points, they would say you may have to reduce them or change some of them because we don't see you completing this in 1 hour, for example. So we had that kind of constructive criticism.
Okay.
In terms of being so-called thrown to the lions, my first job as a formal counselor was actually in Rikers Island. And not to whitewash myself, but I had never been incarcerated before and no connection with the criminal justice system.
Yep.
And so it was my first day inside Rikers Island. And on that first day, I was also asked to run a group with 50 seasoned detainees and inmates. And here I was, a total complete novice, straight out of college, with no background at all in the forensic community.
Mm,
And, and however, having to present myself like a professional who
mm,
knew about the forensic population
mm,
and the drug culture within the forensics and whatnot.
mm,
And so I said, they're going to really chew me out. They're going to identify my weaknesses very quickly, and they're going to call me out on it. And funnily enough, they actually did not.
mm-hmm,
The patients or the residents were very quiet. I
mm,
knew that they were observing, but not very critical and not judgmental either.
mm-hmm,
Also, they were looking more for help. So they were looking at me as what help am I going to bring them?
yeah.
That was one of the learning experiences as to a sort of clarity as to who I was and what was I doing there and what could I do for these patients. My colleagues, thankfully, did not criticize me either. So they did not take me and put me on some kind of platform
Mm-hmm,
where they were going to like start throwing a lot of knives at me and
yeah.
telling me how awful I was in running the groups, which I was awful in the beginning. I was, just very, very novice. Gradually, as time went by, I just became better and better and better. And as I moved on from one job to another job and I matured in years, I just became more seasoned at it and more quicker at it and more aware, more savvy and faster in how to do them and how to handle so-called group dynamics, how
Mm-hmm,
to relax, and how to get the patients to feel relaxed and a-okay for being in a group. So
yeah.
I'm throwing that out for those that are in the group participants here today who
Mm-hmm,
may have a little bit of insecurity.
mm-hmm,
So just please give yourself time
mm-hmm.
and you're going to get there, believe me.
Thank you so much, Oscar. And there's a lot that I could say in response to what Oscar shared. And I want to underline something very specific before we go to Paul, which is that the feedback that Oscar described for us initially was where he was describing creating the content for a group session and then submitting that content for review and guidance about how to shape it so that it could be then facilitated in a group. And again, let's be very clear. When you're introducing educational content or some sort of activities, that's what we call group programming. That's what you're bringing into the group that participants are going to sort of interact with or focus on. Not all groups have that kind of structure, similar to what Eugene told us about the manual that he got. You know, group one focuses on X topic, group two, Y topic. Not all groups are like that. So just keeping that in mind. And getting feedback on creating content for a group is of course a different experience than studying group as a method and practicing group as a method. And to Oscar's final point, that the way you learn how to do groups is by doing groups and reflecting on what you've done and then addressing what you've done. Paul, the floor is yours. Thanks for your patience.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, Paul. Um, I would say when I was at a place in my capacity as a prevention specialist, we didn't have any training on how to facilitate. When I got the job, they already knew I was a teacher. So for them, it was like, oh, well, you're a teacher, you can facilitate. But teaching and facilitation is not always the same thing.
Exactly.
So it just so happens to be as a teacher, I probably did more facilitating, having kids come to an answer, having them reach certain things. So it was easy for me to make a transition. Um, I learned more as time went on. I learned better how to facilitate many groups, but I felt as though in I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say in that field of prevention because I don't think people take it very seriously. And so that there's no time really given to properly train people so that they actually can do the work that you ask of them. It seemed at my particular company, it seemed like it was more about the numbers. And okay, as long as we have the numbers, that's it. We're just going to keep getting the numbers. And that was the biggest concern. It wasn't really about how much we were trying to actually prevent anything. And and a lot of times, what they were actually asking for was someone to teach. It wasn't facilitation because all it really mattered was how a child might answer on a piece of paper at the end. It didn't matter if they actually had any real vested interest at all uh, in trying to make changes or anything.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Thank you. And you know, Paul, thanks for making such a clear and articulate distinction between facilitating a group, and actually teaching and then testing for the learning, because those are two very different things. There's overlap, there's interrelation, but they're two very different things. And what we're talking about here is group facilitation. And yes, you may have a psychoeducational component to what you're doing, and hopefully you're facilitating around that psychoeducational element of your particular group. Okay. Anybody else want to unmute and share a little bit about their group training? Marita writes, is it possible to unpin yourself so we can see the speaker when someone else is talking? If so, greatly appreciate it. I have not pinned myself, and I'm looking at you in a gallery version. So I'm not sure if that's something that maybe our technical my colleagues Clyde Frederick, they have to do it on their computer, Parker says. So you have to unpin me on your computer. Because trust me, you want to be looking at the other Paul when he's talking. You don't want to be looking at me. Excellent. Angela, the floor is yours.
Good morning. So,
Morning.
so I too have a teaching background also. So, yes, that was helped with the transition. Most of the groups that I run here are more psychoeducational. They have a manual, or we have myself and others have sort of created a group with protocol and the topics that we will be including. But now we're trying to get into groups where basically it's the clients group, where we're really just trying to keep them on track and guide the group. And that's what I'm looking for some feedback on, if anybody has any.
Fantastic. And Angela, thank you so much, because I love what you're talking about in the sense that, and I'm so glad you're here, for a lot of reasons, but I'm really glad you're here. The other piece of it is that Angela's talking about like a history of psychoeducational groups where now they're thinking about how do we move into transition into perhaps add mutual aid groups, which are groups that are specifically for the participants. They don't have the associated task of conveying an educational component, but they're quote unquote a mutual aid or support group for the participants. And Angela, there's one word I want to throw out to you, and I'm very curious if you have a reaction to this word, because it's gonna be related to this transition that you're talking about. And I'm so glad you're here to kind of explore that transition within the context of this learning community. Actually, it's two words. And the two words are group purpose. Group purpose. Any thought or any reaction to that, Angela?
Well, for where I'm sitting, yes. So I work in a psychiatric hospital. So we have people on many different levels. Um, and we have some people that have a lot of insight right now. And we want to create groups for them where they can support one another and maybe even call each other out on certain things. Whereas a facilitator, I I can do that, but it's not going to be as impactful, I guess. Um, and also to get them more accustomed to maybe seeking out groups like that in the community.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
So that's kind of where we are.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Now I'm going to make a statement. Angela inspires me to want to make this statement, and anyone is welcome to unmute and comment on this statement. Angela really inspires me to want to say this, which is that group members come to groups for the other people in the group. They don't come for the facilitator. I'm going to repeat that. And Jamie seems to have a strong reaction to that. So maybe Jamie will unmute and say something. But group members come to the group for other group members. They don't come for the facilitator. Jamie, you seem to have a strong reaction to that. And go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I mean, yeah, you see that a lot. That they want to see each other outside of the program that they're in and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And a lot of them look to certain people to try to help them understand what we're talking about. So
Fantastic.
it's not about me, it's
Yep.
about them and their interaction. And that's what they look for, is their interaction.
Yeah. Agreed, Jamie. And you're really helping to underline, as well as Angela, that the driver of the group method is the group participants. The facilitator just accesses that driver. It's the
Right.
group participant. Jamie, you would agree with that? Yeah?
Yes. Yes, very much so.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So folks, Yes, and that is how they build their community. It's how they build their community within the context of the group and in their larger world as well. Anybody else want to react to that statement? Group participants come to group for the other group members, not the facilitator. Jamie, thank you so much for starting us off. Anybody else want to comment on that or react to it or push back against it? Remember, we don't have to agree. You could have a different take on that. Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
I understand what you're saying. I think that works a lot of times, but I think it also depends on the facilitator. At times, if the facilitator provides a safe space, then people coming will enjoy coming to that particular facilitator because they feel that they can then be heard without judgment.
Yes, absolutely. And Paul is underlining one of the key and essential functions of the group facilitator. And Paul, tell me if you agree with this, if you're okay with me framing it this way. One of the key and central functions of the group facilitator is to create, establish, and maintain safety for the entire group. That is your central and primary role as the group facilitator.
Yes,
Everybody, if you agree with that, Paul, is that all right? You would agree? Yeah. Okay.
yes, I do.
Okay. Okay. And that safety, the purpose of that safety is so that each individual in the group can feel safe and so that the group as a body can feel safe to do its work. Paul, would you also agree with that, or thumbs up, middle, thumbs
No, I
down?
agree.
Okay.
No, I
Okay.
agree.
Okay. Yeah. Um, is Mike asks, is that the same for groups attending educational events? Mike, could you say a little more about that? Um, because I, I'm very curious. I think I know where you're going with that, but I don't want to make an assumption. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so I lead a lot of educational events, sessions where high school counselors primarily will come and attend the events to gain some specialized knowledge that they're seeking. And I think they honestly they're not because their buddies are going or whatever. They're there to because they want to learn what I have to say.
Yep.
Honestly, I mean,
Yep.
but I'm not going to say it's totally, you know, that they're not coming because their friend isn't coming. That could possibly be.
Yeah, and thank you for elaborating, Mike. And I think you are drawing a distinction, and I think there's definitely a distinction to be made, which is that quote unquote an educational event where participants are joining a class, let's call it that, are joining a particular class that might be 6 hours long and broken into two parts, and they're there to get some specific information. That is a class. That is an educational class, and they are coming because they also want something from the facilitator. And that also may be relevant to a psychoeducational group, or that might be relevant to a support group as well. I think the thing where we really want to draw the distinction here, though, folks, is that when you're facilitating a group, you are doing your best to help the members to connect to each other. And in a classroom situation, you may or may not be as invested in helping people to connect with each other. Okay, so you're the nuance of the difference between quote unquote the classroom And I really appreciate you putting that nuance on the table, Mike, because what I'm inviting all of us to think about is group facilitation. And group facilitation, in addition to what Paul shared with us earlier, central and primary task to establish and maintain safety for everybody in the group and to help group members to connect with each other. Tatiana, I see that you're unmuted. Did you want to say something? Maybe it was an accident? Okay. Jesse says, I'm curious, what types of groups that members of this group, I'm curious, what types of groups that the members of this group are leading? So Jessica is conducting a poll in the chat where she'd like to know what kind of groups people that are in this group, if you're leading groups currently, what kind of groups are you leading? Are you leading counseling, psychoeducational, mutual aid, etc.? So Jessica is inviting people to give a little bit of information, and thanks for asking, Jessica. That's great. It's good for us to know what kind of groups people are leading. Jennifer writes adolescent, early intervention, IOP. Okay. Counseling, psychoed, but moving to MAT. Yep, psychoeducation. I suspected that there was a lot of psychoeducational, sort of maybe manualized groups. Prevention, recovery dynamics, relapse, psychoeducational. Yep, fantastic. All right. So, folks, I'm going to share my screen. Life skills, psychoeducational. The D and Dana, can you just define what DNA format with that? I'm not sure what the abbreviation means. You can clarify in the chat. Oh, drug and alcohol. Okay. Okay. Thank you. I didn't want to assume. All right. So I'm going to share my screen again, folks. And as I said, these are the learning objectives that we're going to focus on. And I want to advance to groups and you. And I'm just going to ask people to use the chat. If you had to quantify your experience of leading groups, 1 through 5, 1 being, I'm not currently leading groups and I've never led groups. And that's okay. You're welcome here if that's the case. And you have a lot of experience. In fact, you're going to be leaving this learning community conversation at 12, and you're going to be leading a few groups or one group today. Where are you? And let's hear from all 58 of us if we can. Where are you in your experience with leading groups? And just type that number into the chat. So far, 17 people have responded. Let's try and hear from all 58 if we can, because I'm watching that chat counter. And this is also, I think, related to Jessica's query about what types of groups are you leading, because it's also interesting to see how many people, how you would sort of qualify your experience of leading groups. So, okay. So we're getting some Switzerland's, which I think of as 3. Yep. Jeffrey says no experience, but I'm a 5, and maybe Jeffrey will tell us a little more about that. Yep. And Lori is making clear what types of groups. Yeah. All right. So a couple of other questions for you to consider. If you've ever been in a group, and again, you don't need to respond in the chat in regard to that, but have you ever been a member of a group? Jeffrey is clarifying that life experience. Understood, Jeffrey. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, and again, you don't have to reply in the chat whether you've been in a group or not, but have you ever been in a group? And you're just considering that for yourself. Yeah. And Daryl is noting that you've spoken in groups. Okay. And Lori is saying, yes, 12 steps. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm very curious because sometimes the 12-step model is a group model, and it is a group, by the way, it is a group model. And I'm curious if you were going to classify the 12-step group as a group model, how would you classify it? And if you want to put that in the chat, or if you want to art therapy, I'm presuming you're not answering the type of model. Lucian rates a 6 in terms of experience. Busted the chart. Excellent. So what type of group, if you were going to quantify, and I'll take my screen down to entertain this, but let's see if anybody puts in 12 step would be peer support, mutual aid for 12 step. Yeah, I would definitely call it that. I would call it peer support, mutual aid. Yep. Therapy and support. Yep. Peer support, mutual aid, self-help, psychodrama group therapy. And I'm presuming that's a type of group that you lead. Excellent. All right. So let me also ask, and again, and you can answer this one in the chat. Are you currently Smart Recovery? Are you currently leading a group? And that's yes, no, unsure. And let's hear from everybody. Are you currently leading a group? Okay, it's one no, a couple of no's, mostly yeses, few no's. Yep, fantastic. Yep, seems like a lot of people in the learning community are currently leading groups. Sort of understood. Excellent. Very good. Thanks for your quick replies, folks. Greatly appreciated. Just a couple of other questions. And again, we've already talked about this trained to be a group leader before leading groups. We've really discussed that to some degree, thrown in. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to make an I statement about my experience about that. And I would like to pause before I tell you anything about my experience. Not a problem. If you need to step away, thanks for letting me know. It's not a problem. Just step back when you can. So clear your mind and just frame for yourself. I'm going to say 2 words, and what's the first thing that pops into your head? So clear your mind. That's it. I'm going to say 2 words and just type the first thing that pops into your mind, and wait until I say the 2 words until you type. Sandra, you would be so surprised by how many people answer the question before I've asked it. Okay. So you've cleared your mind. You're typing the first thing that pops into your head. You're not judging it. You're just typing. Group work. And I'll even type hard work. I heard yuck. I saw yuck. Community group dynamics, interaction with a goal, transparency, tedious, horrible college experiences. Oh, that breaks my heart to hear that. I'm so sorry that that happened. Checking in, transference, yeah. War, wow. Yeah. These are really entertaining, Jeffrey. It's great. Clear head, support, change. And again, I asked you to type the first thing that popped into your head. Thank you. Uh, diversified interactions. Yep. Anything else? First thing that pops into your head. Group work. Uh-huh. never know who the audience is, collaborate, changes constantly, safe place, support self-efficacy, active listening, community, support. It is challenging. What am I walking into for this one? Yeah, it's it's funny. My professor, Dr. George Getzel, always used to say roller coaster ride. That was his personalities. Yes, yes. All right. So, folks, I want to ask a question. That yes, understood, Jeffrey. That has been the story of your life so far. Understood. So, I want to ask a question, and it's related to the beginning of our learning community conversation. My question is this: I spent specific time in the beginning reviewing the guidelines and inviting any additions to the guidelines. And my question to you all is, in your own words, why did I do that? Why did I do that? To be of service, yeah. Create a safe space, seeking a baseline, inclusion, to empower us, to create cohesion, ethica, and I think it's ethical, motivation, create change, build group expectations, to begin to build trust, to make sure we are heard, build trust, ethical. I thought that's what you meant. Yeah. Create an egalitarian group, serve the purpose. Yes. Yeah. And keep in mind, folks, and I'm thinking of Paul as I say that, the other Paul, not myself. Um, you can't begin to serve the purpose unless you've created the platform or the space for the work to be done. You can't begin to do the work to create, to go toward the purpose, to show how diverse the perspectives of the group members might be, to guide us. Yes, all of these. And so that's the set an example. And Samantha, I'm wondering if you can if you're able to unmute. If you are, can I ask you a follow-up question in regard to that?
Sure.
So could you just elaborate a little bit on what you mean by set an example?
Well, it gives the clients agency, and it just shows that like it kind of shows that you care as and it sets a tone for the community so that they can show to each other that they care.
Okay, thank you so much. And if it's okay, can I ask you a quick follow-up question in regard
Yeah.
to something you said?
Yeah.
Because you actually used a phrase that I really, really want to underline, which is you said set the tone. And I'm asking you, and I'm asking you personally because you answered this question, and I'm just asking for your personal take on this. If you were going to describe to somebody who wasn't here the tone that I set at the beginning of this learning community conversation, how would you describe it?
One of community where it's like an equal partnership. Um, and one where everyone cares about each other and respects each other and cares about what each other has to say and gives each other the opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you so much, Samantha. And if you could just confirm before you remute that I neither spoke to you before this learning community conversation, nor did I pay you to say what you just said.
Confirmed.
Excellent. Excellent. we're going to turn the floor over to Paul, and then I'm going to invite anybody else. And I see Jeffrey put upbeat in the chat. I'm going to invite anybody else to comment on your personal take, your personal experience on the tone. And again, I'm using Samantha's words because really, Samantha, hey, Marin, good to see you. Um, um, they they really were what I was thinking about this. The task of the group facilitator is to truly set the tone. So I'm going to hand it back over to Paul, but then I'm going to, and Paul, maybe you'll comment on this or something else. But then I want to invite anybody else who wants to talk about their experience of the tone that I set at the beginning as it related to the guidelines and just in general, the tone. So, Paul, the floor is yours.
Well, okay, so I was thinking in terms of tone or setting the example, would that also be called modeling? Because I think as a facilitator, if you expect people to do what you want them to do within the group, you also have to model certain things so they can also see the expectation and to understand how to do something. It's one
Yes.
thing to tell people what you expect, but if you don't do it yourself, it doesn't make any sense. It won't work. So I mean that's why I thought we was talking about set the example, setting the tone. I think you have to model everything.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely 100%. Yeah, and it can garner respect, Jeffrey. It absolutely can. It absolutely can. Anybody else want to comment on their experience of the tone? And remember, we're a learning community. I'm asking you for your subjective experience. And if we can, let's try and hear from just one other person's take on that. And then Catherine says warm, collegial. Jeffrey also adds, depending on what's going on with you in your life, that can definitely impact things, Jeffrey. You're absolutely right. Kelly writes, you have to be open to learn from, oh, hold on, more things are coming in the chat. I don't want to miss them. You have to be open to learn from the members as such as they are learning from you. Agreed. The more open the tone, the more interactive you are likely to get. Jessica adds open, encouraging to share, learn from one another with a connection to the objectives. And Leslie adds accountability, mutual respect. Okay. Okay. Fantastic. Thanks for offering that feedback. Now, the thing I'm going to ask you to consider is how did I facilitate that? Because was it magic? Did I cast a spell? Paul says yes. Paul says it was absolutely magic. So the thing I want you to consider, and I'm very fortunate, there are a number of people in this learning community whom I've had the great privilege and honor to be with before. So we do have prior connection. But my question to you is how did I facilitate that? Because it didn't happen out of thin air.
That's your experience, Paul.
Say that again, Eugene.
That's your experience.
It's definitely does it is informed by my experience, but I guess the question too is what did I do? What did I do? Any thought, Eugene, about what I did that helped set that tone?
Um, I guess when you do it more than once, it becomes habit, basically. For me, I'm speaking, I'm keeping an eye on the eye.
Yeah, yeah.
The things that I do now in groups I haven't done when I was, on the bus reading that manual. It becomes something different.
Right.
And we learn new tools to pick up every now and then. So I chalk it up to that.
Fantastic. And again, I really identify with your noting how, like, when you use a particular tool, when you learn a particular tool, you kind of incorporate it into your the way you interact and your process, and then it kind of becomes a part of who you are. So you might not even think about it anymore. You might just do it. Yeah. Understood. Understood. So some folks are putting in the chat group agreements, invitation to share our own requests for group agreements modeling. I asked, and yes, my experience is certainly unique and unique to me. Kelly writes, you are calm, inviting, and open to others' ideas, thoughts to further the conversation, guided questions, and seeking input. Marin writes, tone should hopefully lead to group members being willing to listen and to share. You asked with an open-ended question. Okay, so your repetition, and then it becomes second nature, confirmed. Understood. Yep. And Jessica adds, you established it through modeling, tone, group agreements, and request for us to participate in establishment of this community. Yeah, because it's our community. It's our learning community. Absolutely. So I just want to underline, folks, that creating safety, establishing the group tone and climate are actionable, and they are things that we facilitate when we're, quote unquote, facilitating or leading a group. And Mike, I'm thinking of our conversation about the difference between kind of a classroom and a group, because again, here's another example of where there is overlap. Because this is a unique learning environment. This is a classroom with a little bit of opportunity for group interaction. So it's kind of a hybrid of the two. So just keeping that in mind. And I also really want to underline, folks, the essentials of being clear at the beginning. Jeffrey writes, how do you ensure those two things? Which two things, Jeffrey? You can unmute or type whatever's best for. Yeah, you muted, you remuted.
Oh,
there you
can
go.
you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
You said we have to make sure it's a safe place and the group setting is safe, right? Or what was the second thing? I'm sorry, too.
Yeah. So you establish the safety and the tone
There, thank you.
so that you, or the climate, so that you can then achieve the purpose.
And how do you do that, though, was my question. You know?
And great question. And my question to you is how did I do it?
How did you do it is a better question. Thank you for that.
No. Both are great questions, because
that's what I'm curious of. That actually is my question. Thank you. That's really what my question was. Thank you.
Yeah. So, group, Jeffrey is asking a question. How did I create safety, and how did I set the tone? And some of what you've put in the chat has alluded to that. But Jeffrey's asked, yeah, go ahead, Angela. Floor's yours.
Okay, so this is what I do anyway. Number one, ensure the space you're in is conceived as a safe space to begin with, a physical space. Also, the way I present myself, as far as being receptive to other people's input, not putting anybody down, trying to be supportive. Even if somebody says something a little bit off, try to pick something out of it that was positive and highlight on that. Always going over the guidelines and always asking if they want to add something. For some groups, so like I do some trauma groups too, is ahead of time we ask people certain questions to fill out a little form. What makes them uncomfortable? What makes them feel safe? things like that. Because sometimes people will say, you know, somebody standing too close to me makes me feel unsafe. And I may not have thought of that. So, and then also reading the room, what the feedback is, because they give us feedback, either verbally or just by the way they're acting, and then adjusting. Anyway, that's what some of the things that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Angela. And I don't know if you saw, Jeffrey, but a couple people put a couple of things in the chat. And Maren, I just saw the last thing that you put, which was about setting the group guidelines to help establish the safety as well. And Jeffrey's question prompts me to want to share another observation. And Angela, this will be very relevant, I think, to the transition that you're making in your work from psychoeducational to more mutual aid or peer support. And Jeffrey, this totally relates to your question. And it also relates to Mike's question about the distinction between a classroom and a group. Okay? If I were conceiving of our learning community as quote unquote a particular type of group, I might say that it was an interactive, psychoeducational, time-limited, closed group with the express purpose to focus on group facilitation and using group as a method of intervention. And that would be what I would frame as the purpose of the group. Meaning that everyone that's in this learning community is probably on some level or at some degree interested in that topic and or receiving credit for that topic. And that's why they're part of the group. What that means is that knowing who the participants are and what they want, knowing what the purpose of the group is, helps determine what the tone and the guidelines of the group are. And I want to make that link to the purpose very clear. Because if this group, if our learning community had a different purpose, the guidelines might be different. The content might be different. The number of people, there are 61 people here. When I lead an in-person peer support group, generally there are 8 to 12 people. So the purpose determines the structure and the content and the tone of the group. So if there's one thing you walk away with from today, and I hope there'll be more than one thing, if there's one thing you walk away with from today, it's how central being clear about what the purpose of a group is and how that kind of shapes everything else. And you would hopefully determine that in what we would call pre-group planning. Now, I'm thinking of Eugene as I said that because you remember the great example that Eugene gave us about, you know, hey, you're going to be leading this group. Here's the manual. Study it on the bus and be ready to facilitate. A lot of the pre-group planning has already been done there because the manual exists. The purpose is clear. What Eugene had to do was learn the content, be informed about the content, and then think about how to facilitate that content. Sometimes we inherit groups, meaning that a group has existed, the facilitator leaves, we get the group. And we still need to be thinking about what's the purpose of this group? What's the work that the group is doing? And I'll give one more example and then I'm going to share my slides again. And it relates to a psychoeducational model. Okay? a number of years ago, you remember that I began my social service career providing direct services to people living with HIV/AIDS from 1991 to 2003. During that time period, I created a time-limited psychoeducational closed group that was for people who were newly diagnosed within a year of the start of the group. So everyone in that group had been newly diagnosed with HIV. And the purpose of that group was to provide an opportunity for newly diagnosed people to get some basic information about living with HIV. That was the psychoeducational part. And to interact with other people who were newly diagnosed. That was the purpose of the group. Okay? Go ahead, Eugene. Yeah.
Was that the Positive Life Workshop?
No, I can't even remember what the name of the workshop was, but it was a group that I developed and led at GMHC for over 3.5 years. And I'm not remembering exactly. I think it was just called the newly diagnosed HIV group. Yeah. But I mention this to you because I want you to keep in mind the purpose of the group, the structure of the group, the composition of the group, all people who are newly diagnosed within a year. And I want to mention it because it relates to the example that Eugene gave us about inheriting a curriculum. There was a curriculum for this group, and each group was 90 minutes long. It was an hour and a half, and it was 10 groups. I believe it was, I'm not remembering exactly if it was 10 or 12, but I think it was 10 or 12. But each group was 90 minutes long, an hour and a half. And the first 15 minutes of every group, this was part of the structure to achieve the purpose. The first 15 minutes of every group, 15 minutes, folks, it's 90 minutes long. The first 15 minutes of the group were for the psychoeducational component. And that meant that I was presenting on a topic to the group for 15 minutes. The remaining time in the group was for them to reflect on or discuss anything about that particular topic, or to connect with each other about their experience of living with being newly diagnosed with HIV. Okay? So open dialogue is, I agree, Jeffrey. And I want to tell you, that was the open dialogue was very powerful. It was very powerful. And I share that entire purpose and structure with you because I want you to see that that's one model. And that was developed from the ground up. So there was a lot of pre-group planning before that group was ever even delivered. I'm going to add one other thing, and then I'm going to show you the next slide. Every person who participated in that group, and remember, I led that group for 3.5 years. So there were consecutive cycles, 10 weeks, 10 weeks, 10 weeks, 10 weeks. And it was a new group of people every time. Every person that ever attended that group had a pre-group interview, which meant, yeah, they had a pre-group interview, which meant my department was connected to our testing unit. So sometimes folks literally had been speaking to their HIV counselor who just informed them that they were now living with HIV. And the person would say to them during the course of that conversation, you know, here at GMHC, we have this resource for people who are newly diagnosed where they can join a 10-week group with other people who are also newly diagnosed. Is that something you'd be interested in? And if they said yes, they got an immediate referral to me. So I would meet with them right after finding out that they were newly diagnosed. So they got to meet me. They got to find out about the group. We got to talk about the purpose of the group. We also got to talk about the structure of the group. And then at the end of that meeting, they got to decide whether they wanted to join the group or not. Now, I want you to keep in mind, folks, these were people who just found out news that some of them had very emotional and strong reactions to. They had just been told they were HIV positive. And let's just say it was a very intense conversation. And then they would join this particular group. And it was so successful, that's why we ran it consecutively. And the only reason I stopped running it is because I left that particular job and went somewhere else. So I'm not sure if they still do a model like that, but that's why I stopped facilitating it. So again, group purpose, participants in the group, the structure of the group, the duration of the group, the amount of education in the group. All of that is determined. Yeah, and what I can tell you, Paul, and I can appreciate that you'd be writing the word empathy in the chat, is that one of the things that was most powerful in that group, and it relates to something Jeffrey said earlier, is that the folks that were in this group intensely needed to be with other people who were in the same boat that they were. They needed to talk to other people who also had just been diagnosed with HIV. And that was the group work. They came so they could talk to each other and share information with each other and talk about their challenges and their successes and their struggles together. So again, I just share that as one example. Mike is mentioning that the pre-group survey is ideal, or hold on a second, Mike, I just want to read the whole thing. Hold on a second. Is the pre-group survey ideal, or is it just how some groups happen? Come together right now over me. Yes, great lyric. Yeah, and sharing their lived experience. Yeah. So, Mike, to your question, we found, because I actually was the coordinator of group services at GMHC, we found that, and we adopted the practice of pre-group screening interviews for everybody who presented who wanted a group, because that was just one group of many groups that we led. But we adopted that as a gold standard, that any group, anybody who presented for a group had a pre-group interview. And the reason we did that, because there was a reason, the reason we did it is because it helped people to become more aware of what they could expect from a group and what the expectations of being in a group were. And there were times when we found that some people were going to fare much better in individual work than group work. Because depending on where somebody is at a particular point, a group is not really the best intervention for them. And that can be some of the problems of organizations who just put people in groups and don't really know where that person has been coming from. Yes, absolutely, Jeffrey. It can be a lot related to trauma. It can also be a lot related to where that person is at that particular point in terms of maybe they need more intensive individual work before they can actually interact with other people around a particular topic. And I will also say and I'm not sure if there's anybody here, and if you are doing this, type the letter Y in the chat because it would be very interesting to hear about your experience. Is anybody doing any drop-in open groups? Is anyone facilitating any drop-in open groups? Okay, so Dana says, yeah, a couple of people are for teens. Well, keep in mind, a drop-in open group, folks, you don't necessarily have pre-group screening. So you're responding to who's there in the moment. Yeah. Yeah. It's drop in. Parker, can you say a little more about that? Yes and no. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? I don't know if you're able to unmute. If you are, that would be great. It'd be great to hear your voice. Rory, yes, you're doing a drop-in group. Yeah. Okay. So a drop-in or an open group really can raise other considerations in terms of establishing and maintaining safety, reviewing the purpose, reviewing the guidelines. Jessica writes, not exactly drop in. Not exactly drop in, but it's open as it's a revolving door of screened participants. Yeah, I can unmute. Yeah, go ahead, Parker. If you want to elaborate, that would be great.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound great.
Perfect. So I say yes and no because I recently have been taking over doing a group at a hospital for detox patients for HIV and substance abuse and things like that. So it is open because it's not like a mandatory participant, or I guess it's drop in and people like announce that there's a group, whoever wants to come comes, but it's not open in that it's obviously only open to people in the detox on the hospital ward. But again, it's a drop in participation.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And again, I'll Parker, thank you for elaborating. And I'll contrast that to the newly diagnosed group that I mentioned, where that was a closed, time limited psychoeducational model, meaning that everybody who was in that group had had a pre group interview. The same 10 people that started the group were the only people that were going to be in the group for the full duration of the group. So new people couldn't come whether they were newly diagnosed or not. They had to wait until the next cycle. So again, just keeping in mind these different structures, these groups with different purposes require pre-group planning and pre-thought in addition to different facilitation or programming in terms of if you're using activities or if you're using educational material and how you're going to use that material. So just keeping that in mind. And Michelle writes in the chat, we have one that PSS facilitates. It is all recovery group, consists of individuals waiting to go into a group to have intergroup or have completed group. Okay, so that is almost like an interim or a holding sort of model. And if you could just elaborate, is that an open group or is that a closed group? And Michelle, you can type that in the chat or you can unmute and comment on it if you'd like. And Jennifer writes, I think it's even harder for adolescent groups because of not feeling comfortable around their peers. It's a constant struggle. You always have a few that want to make it a joke and it limits others from feeling comfortable sharing. They are all mandated by the school to attend the group. Yeah, and you also have mandated groups, and Michelle clarifies that it's closed. Yeah. Excellent. Good to know, Jeffrey. Okay. Because really, attending a group kind of from the inside out is a good way to get a feel for what a group actually is. So, folks, I'm going to share my screen now that we've identified groups and you. And I think a number of people have already kind of alluded to some of the things that they want from this learning community conversation. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute, and I just want to underline this. And ironically enough, I was in another course yesterday, also about group work, and people started, thanks for letting me know, Brittany, and people started to identify strengths that they feel they bring to group facilitation. And I'm thinking of Eugene and others when I say this in terms of your experience of facilitating groups and what you bring to groups. And people are also thinking about in this other learning community are also thinking about what are their growth opportunities in group facilitation. So I'd like you to similarly, and again, this is just for your own reflection. Think about what you know and believe to be your strength, what you bring to group facilitation, and areas you think that you might like to refine or grow in terms of your group facilitation. Because honestly, and this may or may not make sense, I think it makes sense, and I'll share it and you can tell me if it makes sense or not. But group facilitation is really learned in reverse. It's learned in hindsight, meaning, let's say Paul and I co-facilitate a group together, and we've done some pre-group planning. We know who the participants are. We know what the purpose of the group is. We know we know that it has a psychoeducational component, and we've determined what we're going to cover in that first group and how much time is going to be spent to that and whatever. And let's say Paul and I have that pre-group planning meeting. We then facilitate. It would be great. We'd probably have a really good time. We facilitate that group, and then we would debrief afterward. We would reflect on, well, did we achieve the purpose? Did it work? Did the content work? How did we facilitate it? What did we learn about ourselves or learn about the group? So if there's a second thing I want you to keep in mind, it's that group facilitation requires reflection. It really requires intentional reflection on what happened the last time you facilitated a group. It requires reflection on pre-group planning, meaning this is the kind of group we want to do. These are the participants. What do the participants have in common? Should there be a psychoeducational component? These are all pre-group planning questions that you want to answer in advance. Paul, the floor is yours.
Yeah. I think that when we talk about the reflection, I think you have to also feel that you can grow from something. When you're a facilitator, it you can go in there with all the so-called answers, but I think you have to also feel as though there's something you can get out of it. And you have to be willing to listen to everyone else for your own personal growth. So I mean that's not normally how I normally did things because I always believe that yes, I have certain knowledge, but everyone's life experience is different, and sometimes you never see from another person's point of view. And once you can see all those things, then it helps round out whatever message must be delivered, or however the group could move, how you can help the group move forward.
Yes, yes. Thank you for adding that, Paul. And I couldn't agree with you more in the sense that the more you facilitate a group, the more you allow yourself to be influenced by what the group offers, the more you actually will be able to be responsive and perhaps more empathic and more insightful about the group that you're actually leading. I couldn't agree with that more. And, you know, it's so interesting because one of the things that I love about group facilitation is helping members in groups to connect to each other. And that's very different than having the members connect to me. When you're facilitating a group, one of your overall goals is to help the members to connect to each other, not necessarily to connect to you. Now, in the beginning, they may feel more connected to you because they know you. Maybe they met you during the pre-group screening or interview. And ultimately, your goal is to want to help them to connect with the other people in the group. So lessen their connection with you and increase their connection with other people in the group. Yeah, Jeffrey writes, yes, it's important to put oneself in the other person's shoes, truly. And Daryl writes, my opinion on speaking groups to be open-minded and non-opinionated so that you can become trusted as a speaker. Yes. Okay. And you may not be alone in that, Jeffrey, that some group participants have difficulty actually speaking in groups. And some group participants can't stop speaking in groups. And as the facilitator, it's about being able to manage all those different, and somebody said this earlier, personalities in the group, because your job is to keep the life of the group, the work of the group going, not necessarily to privilege or to shut down any one or other individual. And Mike writes, is that because the benefit they gain from friendship, group therapy, or other? Yes, it is that, definitely, Mike. And it is another element, I think, and I would add to everything that you've added, which is, remember, the group that I described, the newly diagnosed group, those group participants were not coming to that group for me. They were coming to that group because they needed to be with other people that understood them, that were having their experience to some degree, because no two people's experience is ever the same, but they needed to connect with other people and I'll give a very concrete example, Mike, because this came up constantly in the group. It became a central issue in just about every one of the 10-week cycles. And anybody who's worked in HIV and AIDS will not be surprised by this. One of the central topics that was also one of the psychoeducational topics as well, but one of the central topics that revisited constantly during the whole 10-week cycle and through many of the 10-week cycles was disclosing their HIV status. And folks needed other people to explore what that was and what that meant and how they were going to do that. There were times, and this is a wonderful thing that can happen in groups, where people practiced with each other disclosing their HIV status to family members. And that was part of the group conversation, where they might say, hey, Sandra, I'd really like you to play my mother, and I'm going to try and disclose my HIV status to you. And my mother is kind of like this, so this is how you might want to react. And that kind of came out of the group's work around that particular topic. So I will underline that the thing to keep in mind, folks, is that group participants, they're really, they come to groups for a lot of reasons, but ultimately they come to be connected to people that they have something in common with, and that they have some shared experience with. And I mean, somebody mentioned this earlier. We talked a little bit about the 12-step model. Well, if you think of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is one of a number of 12-step model groups, people come to that group because they have a shared concern, the presence and the role of alcohol in their lives, and how to have a life that is not undermined or destroyed by the substance of alcohol. That's their shared, in common, overall experience. And again, and in the 12-step model, which is a peer support mutual aid model, people share their experience, strength, and hope, living with and managing alcohol consumption or alcohol abstinence from alcohol. So again, group facilitation, creating the tone, establishing safety, maintaining the guidelines, and helping people to connect to each other so that they can do the work of the group, which is defined by the purpose. I'm going to share my screen again. Now, group work, if you keep in mind, just generally speaking, it's a type of intervention, and we know that we have a lot of intervention types. Usually we often think of individual work and group work, but there are two different types of interventions. It's an intervention that involves one or more facilitators usually, and you're usually working with between 8 and 12 people in a standard sort of psychoeducational mutual aid group. If you're working with more than 12 people, you're really stretching the limits of what a group, in terms of group dynamics, can actually do, because it's not going to be ideal for all the participants and their involvement and participation. And again, the idea that different groups have different purposes, they have different goals, they take place in a variety of locations, and that they can be and usually are integrated into a treatment plan that often can also include individual therapy and possibly medication. But group participation in group can be one component. Now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute here because I do want to underline, folks. I said gold standard pre-group interview. A benefit for so many reasons. I know not all programs work that way. Sometimes somebody, does an intake and they say to that person, hey, do you want to be in a group? Or they say to that person, hey, you're going to be in a group. And yeah, they're mandated, right? And that can have its own set of challenges and problems. And Rory, I don't know if you can unmute, but if you can, because you seem to indicate that you have mandated clients in your groups, could you elaborate a little bit on that? Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Sure. You guys can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I work in a halfway house facility for drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
And our facility is a 3-month facility. When they come here, normally in halfway houses, they go out at 8:30 in the morning to go look for jobs. Yeah. But in our facility, they just go online. We have the computers here. We have recovery coaches here that help the clients get online and go look for work. So, but at any time during the times of 9 o'clock and up to 3 o'clock, we have 9:30 groups to 12. Then we have 1 o'clock groups to 3.
Yep.
They understand coming in the facility that they have to attend those groups unless they obtain employment. So But coming in early on, yes, we have those challenges, but they also understand and know that this is part of the facility. This is actually what they look for me. When they signed the papers, they signed on for this. So it's not that much of a, well, what I'm in here for. So it's but it still has those, with anything else, a person has to want it themselves and they have to do the work. And all we do is provide the service for them. They want to do this. This is what's necessary for you to stay in this facility. It's not a. I don't think I want to go to group today. We don't have that. I mean, this is mandatory.
Right. There's no opt out.
No opt out. Correct.
Yeah. Employment is the only way out.
Yes. So that's our aim is for all participants that's in this facility is to be employed. This is the next step after the 28-day program. Detox 28-day. It is the 3 months. Then we have porterhouses after that to continue on in process of recovery.
Fantastic. And Rory, thank you so much for elaborating on that, because your points are so well taken. The idea that like people may not start off with like, I'm gung-ho about this because I know I've been mandated to it. Like, it's not an option. It's like, you're in Rory's program, you're going to group. And as the facilitator, that may need to be addressed. Like, sometimes that actually needs to be addressed. And how that's often referred to, and Rory, I really appreciate knowing more details about your experience. The way that's framed sometimes is destigmatizing the mandate or the referral, so that the person can feel like, yeah, maybe I am a little annoyed or angry or frustrated that I've been mandated to this group, and this is what the possible benefits are of being in this group. And I know I have to be here, so how can I possibly connect with this as best I can at this particular moment? And sometimes that's a process that the person goes through. Is that a fair description, Rory?
It's correct. While you're here, you might as well get the best out of it. Participate. It's called, you said it earlier, the best way to get over something is just do it.
Yeah.
And we encourage it, just do it,
Yep.
It's like the Nike symbol,
Yes. Yeah.
Just do it.
Absolutely. And again, I do want to underline something that Jeffrey alluded to and other people alluded to, is the fact that some people feel, and as facilitators, we need to be aware of this, some people feel more open or more intimidated or closed off to the idea of being in a group. For some people, it may be challenging for a variety of reasons. And again, how we facilitate that, how we extend safety to that person, how we may have post-group contact, one-on-one contact with them, can all be a way to help people to connect in the group. And it's fair to acknowledge that some people are more group oriented than others.
Yes, we have some people that has some strong social anxiety, and us as a facilitators, we get together, we understand that, and we talk about that individual. So when it comes around for them to share, or coming around for people to participate, sometimes we don't put much pressure on that individuals because we understand their dilemma.
Yep. And it's helping people, and my hope is we're going to get to this today. We're going to talk about the stages of group development. But one of those stages, folks, to consider is the forming stage. And in the forming stage, this is Tuckman's model of group development. In the forming stage, folks, where people are, and Rory, you're kind of describing it beautifully, is like, do I want to be here? Do I not want to be here? Sometimes I want to be here. Maybe most of the time I don't want to be here. And that's called approach avoidance. So the person's in, they're out, they're in, they're out. And that's normal to the beginning. And that's why establishing guidelines, creating safety, setting the tone, offering welcome and hope, modeling of the facilitator can help a person to realize, okay, I was mandated, but maybe this isn't going to be so bad, and I know it's safe. So maybe it'll be okay. And that is part of how groups begin. And that's normal. It's totally, totally normal. Thanks so much, Rory. Greatly appreciate the elaboration. All right, I'm going to share my screen again. So we've started to allude to this already, but I will take a moment to just underline that group work as a method, there is a great deal of evidence that shows that it's actually very effective. And groups can be really great at a means of offering support, safety, and encouragement to the participants that are there from other group members. And the research actually does indicate that group work can be equivalent. And I have actually seen anecdotally it surpass what people can actually get out of individual therapy. And yes, they are efficient because they do allow one facilitator to connect a number of people at once. I would be very cautious, though, about thinking of groups as well. They're very cost effective, which they are. They can be. To do a group and to offer a group is different than offering case management in the group. Because if you're doing case management in the group, you're actually not letting the group do its work. So, some people will say sometimes administration might have a misunderstanding about groups, and they might say, absolutely, we need to do groups because we can bill for, and that is true. You can bill for all of that. And you want to be very clear about whether you are doing group work or whether you are doing case management in the group. We've talked about this idea of stigma reduction and peer solidarity. And, the impact of groups can actually be measured. So just keeping those advantages in mind, what I'm going to suggest, understood, Lori, what I'm going to suggest at this particular point, before we talk a little bit about the advantages of group and the stages of group development, I'm going to suggest that we take a 15-minute break. So let's take a 15-minute break. Brittany's like, yes, let's do it. Let's take a 15-minute, Rory agrees. Let's take a 15-minute break. I can't thank you enough for your focus and your attention so far, but let's take a 15-minute break. Don't log off. Just turn your camera off. We'll take 15 minutes. We'll come back and we'll look at a little bit more, and then we'll start to close out our conversation for today. So have a wonderful 15-minute break, and we'll see you soon. Welcome back. Hope you had a good break. Thank you so much for coming back. Excellent. So folks, I'm going to share my screen again. And just to underline a couple of these advantages that when people are in groups, they can actually receive support and encouragement from people who are in a similar situation to the situation that they're in. That in addition to as the facilitator, modeling safety, respect, group members can actually model for each other because if I'm in a group and I see somebody in the group interact one way, I think, oh, well, maybe I could try on that behavior. Maybe I could engage in a conversation that way. Maybe I could handle a situation similarly to the way they did. And yes, people do make the argument that they are cost effective. And again, I would be very clear about the fact that cost effective, yes, and that you want to actually be doing group work as opposed to case management in the group. It can be really helpful from a group facilitator's perspective to have insight into how people interact in a group, because they may interact in a group very differently than they actually do if you see them in individual sessions or if you see them in settings outside of the group. So seeing people, observing people in a group can provide a lot of additional insight into your sort of next steps with that person. So I think we've established this. I think I've made this fairly clear. Understood, Paul. Excellent. And folks are letting me know that they're back. That's great. Again, this idea that there are group guidelines and or there are group agreements, expectations, and rules. And I'm going to make a statement here. If you agree with this statement, type the letter A in the chat. And if you think it's an overstatement, type the letter O. Or if you're unsure, type the letter U. So if you agree with the statement that I'm about to make, I haven't made it yet. If you agree with the statement that I'm about to make, type an A. If you think it's an overstatement, type O. And if you are unsure, type U. The statement is this: that the group guidelines and expectations are the foundation for the success of the group. The group guidelines and the expectations are the foundation for the success of the group. So far, I'm seeing all A's, that people agree. Catherine thinks it's a bit of an overstatement. Catherine, I don't know if you'd be willing to unmute, but could you elaborate on why, in your perspective, that would be an overstatement?
Well, I think those things, those items are, those features are really important. They get things, they're the foundation of things. But I think there are things we can't always account for, things that can't, we're going to be surprised, and we have to deal with those things. I think ultimately it's other factors that make the biggest difference.
Yeah, and you know, I want to underline that I agree with you. I think that there always going to be surprises. I think you can have an ironclad contract. You can have group guidelines, you know, that are set in stone and that the participants have added to. Agreed. And there's still going to be surprises. And they're not any guarantee of smooth sailing. I agree with that 100%. What I will throw out for consideration, and this is just for consideration, is that how you begin is often how you end. And the beginning, and it makes me think of the David Lynch version of the movie Dune. I don't know if anybody has seen that, but the book, I believe, begins with beginnings are a very delicate time. And that is the same thing with groups. That the beginning really does lay the foundation. And again, Catherine, to your point, there are other factors that will play in, that will be influences. And a solid foundation doesn't necessarily preempt surprises or bumps or difficulties. What I can say is without them, it might be really difficult to actually conduct or do group work because they do actually make it possible for the group to actually, focus on its purpose and do its work. So I really appreciate you elaborating on that, Catherine. And Michelle writes, no smooth sailing, but a foundation enables facilitator to resolve within group wants and needs. Yeah, and Jamie says, how do you handle when the group doesn't follow the guideline? So, Jamie, I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing with you, and I'm laughing with you because I can see that as being a powerful challenge. So so a couple of people are writing things in the chat, Jamie. Let's see what they say, and then we can invite anybody else who wants to. Um, Marin writes, do you feel that it's advantageous to actually read the guidelines or some of them, or just have them posted in the room? And I love the practicality of your question, Marin, and I'm gonna answer that. And we're gonna definitely touch on this idea of what if people aren't following the guidelines. But let me respond first to Marin's question. I like to do both. I like to read them out loud and have the participants read them. And I like them to be posted. And by the way, remember I mentioned pre-group interviews, pre-group screening? I also, when I did any of my pre-group screening, every person that I sat with got a handout that said the title of the group, the purpose of the group, the guidelines of the group. So they also got a written handout. And they were also asked during the pre-group interview, do you have any reaction to these guidelines? Are these guidelines that you'd be able to carry out? And if you have problem with any of these guidelines, please tell me. And are there any guidelines you'd like to add? I would even do that during the pre-group interview. So literally by the time they had gotten to put their butt in the chair in the group, because these were in-person groups, they had already been exposed to the guidelines. They had already agreed to the guidelines. But that does not address Jamie's real life question. So, group workers, put your hats on. Jamie, in our learning community, has brought to the table, I'm experiencing participants who won't follow the group guidelines. Jeffrey says, make them sign a contract. Okay. And Jamie, I don't know if Jamie just chopped off your head, Jeffrey, or if she said, I've done that. but 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 let me ask you folks, what is your thought? What would you do in the group? Because what Jeffrey is talking about is maybe a pre-group activity. Go ahead, Paul. I see that you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah. What I normally do with so if I have a student that was always doing extra stuff in the classroom, I help. I make him or her part of the activity itself.
Mm-hmm.
They will help me in turn get out the message I need to get. I think for my years of being a teacher and facilitating in groups of substance use disorders and everything else, I had some people that would do that, and all I would do is, hey, Angie, blah 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 blah, and then I would use her energy to then help facilitate what the group needs.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
so that's how I would do it. I know that there is no fixed way, and um, nothing's ever perfect, but there's a lot of different things you can do to offset things of that nature. And sometimes the group will tell the person, the group will let it be known if it's too much, they'll say, hey, okay, it's enough now. But I think that you find a way to use that person so that it will make up for a better facilitation.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Paul. There's a lot coming through the chat. So let me read a couple of these. Jessica says, can you give an example of a guideline not being followed? I think there is a cookie cutter approach. Brittany, and that's a good question, Jessica, and maybe we can find out more about specifically what's happening. Brittany says, typically I remind them that they signed agreements and ask group to remind everyone of the guidelines established at the beginning of every group. Daniel says, I find that behavioral and guideline contract is easier to enforce if I build it with the group and they expect as much as I do from group, and usually voice that they make it much easier to put in motion. Makes sense, Daniel, because they've bought into it. Jeffrey says to them, lay into them if need be, verbally, of course. Michelle writes, conscious disregard of guidelines results in one-on-one with member. If member continues to disregard, member is at risk of being referred back to referral source. Resolution according to what guideline is being disregarded. Kelly, is it a possibility to have one-on-one conversation with those causing the problem and to understand it's their group and they will only get out of it what they put in? Jessica says it's not a cookie cutter approach. I understood that's what you meant, I think. And Jeffrey also says just speak in truth to them, explain what will happen to them if they continue with that behavior. So, Jamie, any thoughts, any reactions to what our colleagues in the learning community are saying? And can you give us a little more, can you tell us a little more details about kind of what's actually going on in this particular group? And I think Jamie's figuring out how to unmute or ringing somebody out at the register. I can't quite tell. Sometimes it is a trauma response. That's absolutely true. And that would be a powerful, it would be very powerful to know that. And you, of course, would intervene probably on an individual level. And I love what you're saying there because it really does imply that we want to be considering that, and let's face it, folks, groups can be very stimulating for people. And I'm going to add another word to that. They can also be triggering, and they can trigger traumatic issues. And that's why doing a pre-group interview, knowing somebody's history, can be very, very possibly a benefit. Parker also adds, I would try and have it as a respect perspective in that shared social behaviors help make everyone feel respected depending on the behavior. Jeffrey adds, that person would probably need more one-on-one attention before entering group, possibly. Angela writes, have a discussion perhaps there is a reason that person cannot adhere to the guidelines. Maybe a resolution compromise can be reached. Yeah. Yeah. And keep in mind, folks, these are all what I would call, and they're really great, they're sort of speculative approaches. We're speculating on how we might proceed. And go ahead, Jamie, give us a little more detail if you can.
Okay. Well, first of all, I was baptized by fire getting into doing groups and stuff here and didn't have anything about doing guidelines or expectations or having them sign any type of agreement or anything. Right. So that's something to talk to my boss about. But I have one woman that says the most outrageous things. And she also proselytizes. So, and we're trying to remind her this is not the place or the time.
Yeah.
And she just continues to do it. I mean, she'll say the most outrageous thing, and I don't even want to repeat what she said. But then the other stuff is also her saying, well, if you would get God in your life, you'd be okay, or whatever. And, trying to, I guess, talk to her individually is really the only real response to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And Jamie, I really hear it in your tone of voice that this is something you're really trying to manage responsibly, and you're feeling at wit's end in regard to it.
Yeah, I mean, she's a very sweet person, but in groups, she tends to get out of control.
Yep. 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 And I think your insight, and we're going to go to Michelle in just a minute, but I think your insight around that a post group individual conversation might be warranted. And, what you're really talking about, and again, Jessica, I think you mentioned this, the idea that this person could be having a trauma response or whatever. But what this is really a matter of is this is a matter of containment, because
Oh.
because people have to learn to contain sometimes their impulses. They can't impulsively um, act on whatever it is they need to act on. And people can share a perspective. This person may truly believe that, if this person, changed their behavior, had a different relationship with a power greater than themselves or with God, that maybe this person's life would be better. And there's a way that people can share a perspective that's not proselytizing, that's not offensive to people in the room. So I think your thoughts about approaching her individually, and again, we could spend another 6 hours, and I wish we could, but unfortunately we can't. But we could spend another 6 hours talking about how do you conduct an individual conversation with a group member about their behavior in group, because there are some guidelines and some parameters that we could kind of consider about how to do that in a way that helps that person to feel heard, respected, and yet clear about what's not working in the group. And that in and of itself would be a whole skill set. So, Jamie, let's hear from Michelle, and then we'll see where we go from there. Michelle, the floor is yours. Thanks for your patience.
I just wanted to add that it can be challenging when we, having someone in the group who's not only dominated but very stern in what they believe, and sometimes it affects other members because they're not as boisterous of, hey, I don't believe in that. So what I like to do a lot of times, and I've learned to do, is invite the group in, because it is the groups, and if that's where the group begins to go, then as the facilitator, then I normalize that, because what one of the easiest things to say is, well, group, what do you feel about what so and so is saying? And a lot of times, once the group members begin to share with that individual, sometimes it'll get a little up, and as a facilitator, you bring it back down, but allowing them to have that discussion so that they begin to learn what works for each other is more so. I think it became a problem for me when it was more personalized, when that dominating individual was saying something that I totally disagree with, and I really had to look at what is it about what this person is saying is affecting me so much that I really want them to shut up, so it may not even had anything to do with the group. It mostly had to do with me, right? That's all I got, Paul.
No, that's a lot. Thank you. That's what you've got. Thank you so much, because there's so much that you just said, Michelle, and I really want to underline two very specific things. And I love the fact that you said, so, group, what do you think about what Jamie is saying? That is group work, inviting the group to be part of it. And again, that has to be done in such a way that Jamie doesn't get attacked by the group. We want to make sure that Jamie is safe and everybody else is safe too. But what Michelle just demonstrated was a group intervention, inviting the group in to comment. And again, Michelle, such insight in what you said, that it helps the other group members to understand, hey, we're not all coming from the same place. And it's okay for us not to all be coming from the same place in this group. Okay? and that you coming from your place is just as important as me coming from my place. So that very powerful example. And then the other thing that I really, really thank you, Michelle, for talking about, because this in itself could be another 6-hour training conversation, is that we're aware of our own reactions to things. Because let's face it, folks, there are things that group members are going to say that we are not going to like. There are going to be group members that we don't like. And we still need those group members to feel safe and to feel heard. And Michelle, thank you so much for your example, because that's what the post group and in the moment group reflection is. You know, Jamie's talking and I just want her to shut up. I don't really feel that way, Jamie. I'm just using it as an example. And I really want her to shut up. Now, hopefully a bell is going off in my head. Like, why am I having such a strong reaction to what Jamie is saying? And I'm going to be pretty darn curious about that. And I'm going to be pretty intentional about how I interact with Jamie. And hey, group facilitators are human beings, folks. We bring our stuff to the moment too. But because we are the facilitator, in Michelle's really powerful example, we're examining it during the group and after the group so that every group member feels safe, respected, and heard. Absolutely. Michelle, thank you so much. Angela, the floor is yours.
So I like Michelle's idea of group intervention, but I caution that we need to know our audience before we try that.
Yeah.
That might not work with the population I work with. Sometimes what I try to do is remind people to use I statements because, you know, finding God may work for you, but may not work for everybody. And I try to remind people everybody has their own recovery path. And also I have a few people that have a lot of impulse control issues. What I've done is I've spoke to them privately and asked them if they'd like for me to give them a cue when I notice that they are starting to do whatever it is they do. And that actually worked with 2 people. One person, it kept them from hogging the time, so to speak. And the other one, it helped with, he kept with drifting to, you know, like a lot of, what's the right word? Some paranoid thoughts, let's put it that way.
Okay.
And if he felt he couldn't control it after a couple of cues, he learned to excuse himself. So there's ways around it sometimes.
Fantastic, fantastic. And folks, I'm going to, it definitely is progress, especially if the person can kind of remove themselves. I'm going to also throw out something for folks to consider too, because sometimes this is something that the quote unquote facilitator has to do. Okay. And I want to be very clear about this. And before I say what that is, I'm just going to tell you that I had the great opportunity to work with a group worker from, I believe Saskia was from Belgium. And she and I were colleagues together for a little over a year. And she came to me once about a situation similar to what you're describing, Jamie, where a particular individual in the group kind of kept behaving in a particular way that was disruptive to the group. And she was co-facilitating the group with somebody else. And they both came to me and said that this dynamic was, because I was their quote unquote supervisor. And I worked with them and we practiced this idea where sometimes as the facilitator, and Michelle, I'm thinking of you as I say this, sometimes as the facilitator, we have to say, group, we're going to stop right now. Because something is going on that's not working and not in alignment with our guidelines. And we're going to stop and work through this before we get back to our work. So sometimes as the group facilitator, you are doing that in the service of managing a dynamic that could be turning into being unhelpful or unsafe. And or something that's volatile. Yeah. You sometimes have to step in and do that. Now, my colleague Saskia and her co-facilitator, the idea of them doing this was very contrary to their experience of facilitating groups. And they were frightened at the idea of having to step in to do that. And they were very candid about it. And we practiced it a number of times. And you want to know the funniest thing about it is after we practiced it and they were so prepared to do it, you know where I'm going, the behavior stopped. They didn't need to do it. So I know, Jamie, it was unbelievable, but they didn't need to actually do it. But they were prepared. They could do it if they needed to because they had built some confidence. Yes. So just to keep that in mind, folks, that sometimes as the facilitator, our essential and primary role is to establish and maintain safety for everybody in the group. And if something's getting unsafe, we need to stop and address what needs to be addressed. And Jamie, I think your insight into maybe speaking to this person, privately, being very clear about what the purpose of the group is, how we've agreed, and that you want to work with them to make the group work for them, and that certain behavior is not acceptable in the group. Yeah. So, Jamie, any thought, any reaction to that?
Yeah, I just know that with the particular groups that we're having, the people in there, they don't feel, I can tell that they don't feel comfortable once she started that, but also they don't feel comfortable trying to say something to each other. So I wonder if we should talk about guidelines also, how you can interact with other members when they're not quite saying something you don't agree with, or it's not following the guidelines.
Yeah.
And I think maybe some people just aren't comfortable. They're looking to me like, fix it, basically.
Yep.
So they're not comfortable trying to do that.
Yeah, and I could imagine, and I'm thinking of Michelle as I say this to you, I could imagine you saying, group, let's revisit our guidelines and how we're going to handle it if the guidelines aren't being followed. What's your thought about that? What's your take on that? What's most important? And again, inviting them to, and I think that could be very effective, Jamie, in addition to that private conversation that you have with this person about their particular behavior. Yeah. And Jeffrey writes, what's our next action step going to be here? In terms of in the group setting. In that group setting. Yep, got it. Yeah. And of course, folks, group members are going to look to you. They're, of course, going to look to you. And that doesn't mean that you can't turn that into a group intervention and also do that private conversation as needed. Yeah. Understood, Sandra. Okay. So, folks, we are at the last 5 minutes of our time together. I cannot thank you enough for your participation today. And I'm going to ask you to do one final thing in conclusion of our time together today. And that is simply this, is to take a nice deep breath and let it go. Excellent. And with that nice deep breath in you and a clear sort of mind, let one thing rise to the top about your experience today. And if you could crystallize that one thing into one or two words about your experience today, type those one or two words in the chat. Just one or two words that describe your experience of our time together today. There's no wrong or right. This is your subjective take on your experience of our time together today. And again, as they're coming in, please read what people are writing in terms of their experience. And if we can, let's try and hear from everybody if possible. Ooh, love that, Nicholas. Love pizza. Not alone in loving pizza. Folks, I'm very much looking forward to seeing you for our part 2. We are going to find that article about group work versus casework in the group and send it to you. Again, your mission, if you choose to accept it, is to look over this article, and we will touch on it to some degree as just a way to begin our part 2. Okay? Thank you so much, everybody. Looking forward to seeing you next time. Take care.